Eddie Van Halen's death from cancer was a terrible tragedy. Many guitars could not match his speed or influence on a whole generation of musicians. Clapton has always kept his thoughts to himself, but now he is speaking out about Eddie Van Halen. What did these two famous musicians do to each other? Eric Clapton talks about Eddie Van Halen and how their friendship went from being awe-inspiring to tense. After being quiet for a long time, Clapton was ready to fix the record. In terms of Eddie Van Halen, what did he think? Eddie's early admiration for Clapton. Eddie Van Halen was hooked on Eric Clapton from a very young age. Eddie was deeply moved by Clapton's work with Cream, while most guitarists of the time were listening to more modern artists. Clapton liked him more than just a little. He turned out to be very important in Eddie's life. His room was filled with Cream songs that he played over and over again. He would really listen to Clapton's solos and try to copy every note, riff, and subtle bend. No other musician could match Clapton's style, especially the way he mixed blues and rock, which Eddie liked. Eddie from the Admiration said that for a long time Clapton was the only guitarist he looked up to. He was obsessed with getting everything just right, and his love for Clapton went beyond just learning and listening to his albums. Eddie wanted to do more than just play like Clapton, no matter if it was Crossroads or Sunshine of Your Love. He also tried to understand Clapton's ideas about music. This in-depth look at Clapton's guitar skills helped Eddie make his own sound, which changed rock music forever. Eddie, on the other hand, thought Clapton's ability to show how he felt through his music was more important than his skill. Clapton's solos were not only fast or complicated, but they also kept the audience interested as Eddie improved his skills and found his musical style. That level of emotional depth became more important to his work. He even put up pictures of Clapton in his bedroom. Eddie saw Clapton as more than just an inspiration, he saw him as a hero. Eddie wanted to be like Clapton when he was a musician. Eddie, when he was young, thought that Clapton had reached the highest level of guitar skill, which was something he had always wanted to do. What other changes can respect make to become even more complex? Their first meeting, mutual respect. Eddie Van Halen and Eric Clapton had been watching each other for years before they finally got to meet. Evan had been dreaming of this moment. A big deal for him was meeting the musician who had shaped his musical path. When the chance came up during one of Clapton's tours, Eddie called him, feeling both excited and nervous. Eddie wasn't just a fan, he was already known as one of the most creative musicians in rock music. But that didn't make him less excited about Clapton. When Eddie and Clapton met for the first time, Eddie told Clapton right away how much he meant to him. He talked openly about how Clapton's style had changed his sound, and how he had spent hours and hours learning every note and solo. That was a look of utter awe, and Clapton, who is known for being quiet and humble, took the praise with class. Clapton wasn't the type to take pleasure in compliments, but he did thank Eddie for what he said. The love for guitar, they had a good start to their conversation. They talked about guitars, singing, and how hard it is to be the center of attention. Eddie talked with his hero for the first time, and Clapton talked with someone who knew what it was like to be a famous guitarist. It made sense for them to become close. Respect for each other and a knowledge of each other's paths were clear. Even though their career paths were very different, their love for the guitar was clear. Skills and possibilities. People who knew Eddie thought this meeting was the start of something amazing. There may be a friendship or a partnership. Besides, Clapton saw Eddie's skill and promise, and Eddie finally met the man whose music had inspired him. But soon enough, we'll see that only some heroes. Friendship comes from worship. The turning point. Clapton's response. Eddie Van Halen's relationship with Eric Clapton changed at a very important time in his business. Eddie worked on a project with Brian May, who is also a famous musician. A lot of people were interested in their relationship, and Clapton eventually found out about their work. Eddie had looked up to Clapton his whole life, and he hoped that Clapton would support him, or at least like his work. But Eddie had to think about what Clapton would say when he was asked about the partnership. The cracks in their friendship, Clapton didn't offer support or praise, but instead brushed them off. He didn't care about what Eddie and May were trying to do and wasn't very interested in the idea. Eddie was deeply hurt by Clapton's lack of emotion. This felt like an insult to an artist who had always looked up to Clapton, even though Eddie didn't like getting praise all the time. It hurt more when Clapton's IC turned on. It was clear that Clapton didn't appreciate Eddie's work because he wasn't interested in it, but his reaction wasn't rude or hostile. The arrogant way Clapton acted, it wasn't just working together with Brian May. That's how Clapton looked down on Eddie's drive and hard work. Eddie, who had a lot of respect for Clapton, started to notice that their friendship was falling apart at this point. Eddie has always been honest about how he feels about Clapton. He wasn't afraid to talk about how much he loved Clapton and how much he influenced his playing. That day, though, Clapton's rude behavior showed Eddie that the feeling wasn't shared. The hero-mentor relationship that used to be so exciting seems one-sided now. As the cracks in their relationship got bigger, it was clear that Eddie and Clapton didn't agree. Because of this answer, Eddie's opinion of Clapton changed. Look at how things went wrong. The confrontation, Eddie's insult, Eric Clapton, and Eddie Van Halen's dislike for each other grew over time. Eddie used to respect Clapton, but now he just annoyed him. After their first meeting and Clapton's dislike of Eddie's work, the two guitar legends' friendship turned bad. Eddie was let down by the guy he had admired for a long time, and their friendship went from good to worse. Getting angry, it all came to a head one night when Eddie was drunk and lost his cool. He lost any chance of a relationship because of the stress at work and his dislike of Clapton's behavior. When Eddie called Clapton a teabag while drunk, it was clear that he had lost it. It was a slur, and it wasn't just a statement. It was anger that used to be respect. That person said those mean things about Clapton, who had always carried himself with calm respect. In addition to attacking Clapton's character, Eddie's choice of words showed how deeply unhappy he was with someone he used to admire. Eddie used the comment, which was rude and out of the blue, to let out all the anger he had been holding in for years. The drift between the two tales at this point, everything between the two tales had changed. The insult was the last straw that ended any chance of getting along again. Eddie might feel bad about what he said in the future, but the damage was already done. Clapton, who was known for avoiding drama and strife, didn't say anything about it in public, but it was clear that they didn't agree. Eddie and Clapton's relationship was in shambles when they stopped talking to each other. Adding to the importance of this event is the fact that their possible relationship quickly turns into hatred. Eddie thought that Clapton was the best drummer ever, but when he insulted him while drunk, everything fell apart. Once the respect turned into disgust, there was no going back. After what happened, these two heroes couldn't go back. The fallout, no more talks. Eddie Van Halen lost his cool and insulted Eric Clapton, ending their relationship all of a sudden. Eddie's words ended any chance of getting back together, and they never talked again after that. It looked like a good relationship would work out between two of the best rock artists, but it ended in silence and anger that wasn't said. He used to look up to Clapton, but now that person didn't want to talk to him. Eddie was in a situation where the person he used to look up to no longer wanted to talk to him. With the booze and anger behind it, the insult did damage that could not be fixed. Clapton, who is known for staying out of trouble and being quiet in public, chose to stop taking part. The fact that he kept quiet shows that he didn't want to fix the relationship. Silence that hurts. Eddie found this silence hard. Clapton's angry behavior had already hurt him, but the fact that they stopped talking to each other sealed their breakup. Eddie changed from being amazed to being disappointed as it became clear that Clapton, the person Eddie had once looked up to, wasn't who Eddie thought he was. Influence each other's work, even when they weren't talking. Their songs continued to have an effect on each other's work. Eddie and Clapton were both rock stars, and their legacies grew stronger even though their friendship grew weaker. Eddie sometimes talked about how Clapton had affected his playing in interviews. The kindness that had been in his words before was gone, though. He no longer felt the magic he had felt when watching Clapton's solos. Clapton didn't lose sight of his songs. Clapton, on the other hand, never talked about what happened in public. He kept working on his songs by putting out CDs and playing live. Clapton's style stayed a part of rock music, and even though he might not have mentioned Eddie by name, there's no doubt that he had an ongoing effect on the people of Qatar. Even though they were quiet, they still had an effect on each other. Eddie's groundbreaking techniques, there's no doubt that Clapton had an effect on Eddie's playing, and Eddie's new techniques kept making rock guitar more useful. They still admired each other's artistic skills even though they never talked again, even though their relationship was over. When they don't say anything, their effect on each other doesn't stop. Their legacy in music, different path, even though they had differences. Eric Clapton and Eddie Van Halen's music careers had a big impact on progressive rock. Each of these guys made a unique contribution to the sound and future of guitar playing. Clapton was one of the best guitarists ever because he played with a lot of emotion and used blues-inspired riffs. Eddie, on the other hand, pushed the edges of what was technically possible on a guitar and came up with new techniques that inspired a whole generation of artists. A sign of real music, Clapton's success was built on his emotionally charged approach to music. He was known not for his technical skill or his amazing solos, but for the pure emotion he put into every note. Between his work with Cream and his solo work, Clapton made a name for himself as a true musician. His music was usually easy to relate to. They are honest and deeply rooted in the blues. Hits like Layla and Tears in Heaven showed how brilliant he was, and his influence reached artists of all types, not just rock musicians. Eddie Van Halen. The rock icon Eddie Van Halen changed rock guitar with his unique style and new ways of doing things. He set himself apart from his predecessors by adding tapping and fast-paced breaks. He became famous right away as Van Halen's lead guitarist. His technical skill and ability to mix difficult techniques with catchy melodies were shown off in songs like Jump and Eruption. Eddie's way of playing the guitar was revolutionary, and it changed the way everyone else played it forever. The heart and the skill. Clapton and Eddie had big effects on the rock business, even though their artistic paths were different. Eddie brought creativity and mechanical skill to the table, while Clapton added feeling and sincerity. They were the embodiment of both the skill and the spirit that made rock guitar so powerful. Even though they had disagreements and unresolved personal problems, their gifts to music were inextricably linked. Artists of today still talk about Clapton and Eddie as influences, which shows how influential their work was and still is. Even though they left behind unresolved conflicts, their accomplishments show how talented they were. In different ways, both of these guys changed the rock business for a long time by pushing the limits of music. Eric Clapton had been quiet for years about his friendship with Eddie Van Halen. On this day, he broke his silence. Fans and the media made guesses about the fight between the two giants while he didn't talk about it in public. But as time went on and Eddie's influence on music was still praised, Clapton finally spoke out. This gave us a unique and deep look into their complicated relationship. Clapton thought Eddie was extraordinary. Talent. Clapton didn't sound sorry or angry when he talked about Eddie. Instead, he talked about the respect that had always been there, even though they had problems. Even though they had differences, Clapton admired Eddie's amazing guitar skills and creative ways of playing. He knew Eddie's creative ideas and technical skill had completely changed the rock music scene. Clapton thought Eddie was a real leader who had permanently changed the possibilities of the instrument. Acknowledgement of his actions. Clapton admitted that his actions may have caused them to fight after thinking about their troubled past. He had a reputation for being quiet and distant, and he knew Eddie might have thought his rude behavior was meant to be mean. Clapton said that mistakes were a big reason why their relationship was getting worse, even though he didn't agree with Eddie's outburst or the harsh insult that came after it. Wish their relationship had gone differently. The most interesting thing about Clapton's thoughts was that he understood how hard it was for both of them to be professional artists. He knew Eddie had liked him, and even though he didn't say sorry, he seemed to wish things had gone differently between them. Even though they were fighting, it was clear that Clapton had the utmost respect for Eddie as a guitarist and artist who had left an indelible mark on the music business. The testament. Clapton's calm, introspective comments served as a warning that relationships aren't always easy, even among titans. Their extreme fame, constant demands, and personal problems often got in the way of what could have been a closer friendship. But Clapton's honesty about their troubled past showed that they respected each other's musical skills. In the end, Clapton's thoughts painted a moving picture of two giants whose lives had crossed and gone in different directions, but whose legacies were connected. His words showed how difficult relationships between people can be and how respect and admiration can last even when people don't agree. What we can learn from their story, the story of Eddie Van Halen and Eric Clapton, is a moving lesson that big-name artists have problems in their personal lives too. A huge number of people loved both guitar stars They were at the top of their game, but their relationship was strained by misunderstandings, irritations that were never said, and personalities that didn't get along. It shows that everyone has problems, even those who seem more important than life. For example, we all get hurt when people we admire let us down. Eddie spent years looking up to Clapton and learning how to play the guitar by studying his methods and using Clapton's songs in his own playing. Even though Clapton seemed distant at times, he never played Eddie down for how smart he was. There was a time when Clapton finally talked about Eddie. He did so knowing that both artists had a hard time dealing with the weight of huge demands and fame. Complexity of human relationships. One of the most important parts of their story is how complicated relationships can be, even between two singing giants. In spite of the relationship, even though it didn't turn out to be the bond Eddie had hoped for, they always respected each other. There were no personal problems that could ever change how much they loved the guitar or how much they wanted to push its limits. Changing the course of rock music. Eddie may not have always looked up to Clapton as a hero because he was annoyed with him, but they finally agreed that each other had done amazing things in music. In his last words about Eddie, Clapton talked about how Eddie had a long impact on his life and how much he admired Eddie's artistic skills. Even though they were different, their memories have mixed and shaped rock music for many years. Mutual admiration. We might learn from their story that even the most tense relationships can be built on mutual admiration. Their story shows that even the most amazing artists may not always get along with their partners, but the art they make together may be more important than any arguments. Their effects on rock music, even though they didn't Eric Clapton and Eddie Van Halen have changed rock music by getting back together and becoming friends. Both changed the way people thought about music and the guitar, which had an impact on many artists. Clapton's wise notes about Eddie show that even legends are human, and they give us a unique look into the complexities of their relationship. But for many years to come, their music will always be connected to, inspire, and change the rock world.